I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal did not happen.
Alright, listen to this. The UFC just locked down the most insane media rights contract in combat sports history. We're talking about a monster 7-year package worth an absolutely mind-blowing amount. And here's the game-changing part. This massive agreement with Paramount completely destroys the old pay-per-view system. That's right, every single fight card is shifting entirely to streaming for one low monthly fee. Obviously, fans were going completely wild celebrating this news. Can you blame them? Up in the corporate offices, executives were popping bottles like it was New Year's Eve. Dana White himself announced this as the dawn of a revolutionary new chapter for mixed martial arts. But then, everything came crashing down. Justin Gaethje, the man they call the Highlight, an absolute legend who holds more Fight of the Night bonuses than anyone in UFC history, sat down in front of cameras at the UFC 34 Media Day. What came out of his mouth next? Just 6 simple words tore down the entire facade. He looked straight ahead and said, "I'm not getting $1 more." Now here's why that statement hit like a freight train, because right before this, Daniel Cormier, one of the most trusted voices in MMA, had confidently announced to everyone that fighters were already banking more cash and better benefits because of this brand new Paramount agreement. You know, I hear Daniel Cormier saying that everybody's gonna get paid more on this card. The story that UFC brass and Dana White were spinning painted a completely different picture. Dana had even suggested that those performance bonuses, the extra money fighters chase for incredible shows, would definitely go up. Everything was set up perfectly. The official line was that this would benefit absolutely everyone. More money across the board, bigger payouts everywhere. But then Justin Gaethje, the Highlight, the guy literally headlining the first show of this multi-billion-dollar era, stepped forward and completely destroyed that carefully crafted story. His raw honesty revealed exactly how the UFC's massive $7 windfall has actually exposed the harsh truth about what fighters really earn in mixed martial arts. Let me break down the specifics of this game-changing new contract. Saturday, January 24th, 2026 is circled in red on every MMA fan's calendar as the date for UFC 3024, this massive event happening at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. This isn't your typical fight night, it's the inaugural numbered card under the UFC's enormous new 7-year, $7.7 billion broadcasting deal with Paramount. For fight fans, this represents an incredible victory and transformation. Under the previous ESPN setup, if you were a die-hard UFC follower, you were dropping a steep $79.99 for every single pay-per-view event on top of your monthly subscription costs. When you calculated everything together, you were staring at an annual expense that could easily hit $1,200 just to keep up with your favorite sport. Now, with this revolutionary Paramount system, those individual pay-per-view charges are completely gone. Instead, you get access to every USC event for just $7.99 monthly with advertisements, or a still very reasonable $12.99 without them. So absolutely, for the fan base, this marks a clear win for both accessibility and keeping costs down. But for the UFC and its parent company, TKO Group Holdings, the financial impact is absolutely staggering. Their previous ESPN contract generated around $500 million annually. This new Paramount agreement, however, more than doubles that figure to an incredible $1.1 billion each year. Just think about those numbers for a moment. That represents an additional $500 million, roughly $550 million, pouring straight into the UFC's bank accounts. And here's what makes this even more profitable. Since most of their production expenses stay relatively the same, that extra $500 million basically becomes almost pure profit for the organization. The only real variable costs are what they pay the fighters, which, as we're about to see, remains completely up to the UFC's discretion. Let's go back to Wednesday, January 24th, 2026. UFC 3024 Media Day. Justin Gaethje, sitting in front of a crowd of journalists, was there to build hype for his much-anticipated interim lightweight title bout against the explosive Paddy Pimblett. Gaethje, as everyone knows, earned the nickname the Highlight for damn good reasons. He owns one of the most spectacular and crowd-pleasing records in UFC history. In his 14 UFC fights, check this out, he's claimed an incredible 14 post-fight bonuses. That means every single time he enters that cage, he puts on a show so amazing, so worth watching, that he pockets an additional $50,000. A reporter, probably thinking about all that bonus cash, asked what he'd done with those earnings. But instead of talking about smart investments or charitable giving, Gaethje dropped a harsh reality bomb. He said, with complete honesty, "Oh man, to have 14 bonuses and not have it equal up to $1 million, it's not right." He continued, "It should be a lot more than that. I should have had opportunities to do smarter things with my money, but I don't and I haven't." When you crunch those numbers, the math is absolutely brutal and almost impossible to believe. Gaethje collected 13 of those bonuses at $50,000 apiece, totaling $650,000 apiece, totaling $650,000 apiece, totaling $650,000 at the legendary UFC 300, in a war against Max Holloway that people instantly called one of the greatest, most violent fights in UFC history. He received a special $300,000 fight of the night bonus. Add it all up, and his grand total reaches $950,000, still $50,000 short of hitting that $1 million mark, despite earning a bonus in literally every single UFC appearance he's ever made. For context on that UFC 300 battle, it concluded with Holloway landing a knockout punch that left Gaethje unconscious with exactly 1 second left in the 5th round. Picture this for a second. Gaethje took brutal career-shortening punishment for 24 minutes and 59 seconds. His compensation for that sacrifice, a mere $300,000. Then Gaethje shifted focus, addressing the new Paramount deal directly. And this is where things get really fascinating. I hear Daniel Cormier saying everybody is gonna get paid more on this card. Gaethje said, clearly irritated, "I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal did not happen." This declaration, coming from a main event fighter on the very first card of this supposed golden age, completely contradicted everything UFC leadership had been proudly announcing. It makes us wonder about something crucial. If the headlining fighter, the one kicking off a $7.7 billion era, isn't seeing even one extra penny, then who exactly is benefiting? To really understand the weight of Gaethje's words, you need to know how the UFC pay structure actually works behind the scenes. Legal documents that came out during the famous Lee vs. Zuffa antitrust case reveal the shocking reality. UFC fighters on average take home only between 16 to 18% of total company revenue. Let's stack that up against other major professional sports leagues worldwide, and you'll see just how massive this gap really is. NBA players, thanks to strong union-negotiated collective bargaining, receive a whopping 50% of league revenue. NFL players get 48%. NHL players also take 50%. Even the WNBA, a much younger league, ensures its athletes receive 50% of league revenue. The UFC's 16 to 18% doesn't just fall short of these numbers. It's a massive canyon. This huge disparity in compensation exists for one main, undeniable reason. UFC fighters have zero union representation. They have absolutely no collective bargaining power whatsoever. They're labeled as independent contractors, which means they're completely stripped of basic protections like healthcare coverage or retirement plans. In 2023, the UFC by itself brought in a colossal $1.3 billion in revenue. In the first half of 2025, that number jumped to an incredible $75 million, a figure that highlights the company's explosive financial expansion. Yet despite these truly enormous, constantly growing numbers, the fighters, the actual people who create this revenue with their blood and sweat, remain stuck with that same pathetic 16 to 18%. When Dana White, the public face and leader of the UFC, was directly confronted about increasing fighter compensation, his response during a GQ interview was famously harsh and almost dismissive. He boldly stated, "It's never gonna happen while I'm here." White continued by asserting, "Believe me, these guys get paid what they're supposed to get paid. They eat what they kill." He even had the nerve to challenge critics, telling them to launch their own MMA promotion if they didn't approve of the UFC's compensation structure. But this challenge, when you really examine it, completely ignores a brutal, undeniable fact. The UFC effectively dominates an estimated 90% of both the entire MMA industry's revenue and its elite talent pool. Creating a truly competitive organization isn't just challenging, it's virtually impossible when one company holds such a strangling monopoly. This deeply embedded pay structure creates not just challenging, but genuinely devastating financial situations for the overwhelming majority of fighters. Think about this. Entry-level UFC fighters might earn a gross payout of $10,000 to $20,000 per bout. More established fighters, the ones you recognize, might bring in $50,000 to $100,000. But remember, those are gross figures before any costs get subtracted, and the costs are absolutely crushing. A single training camp can easily run anywhere from $50,000 to a jaw-dropping $100,000. Coaches demand their cut, usually 10 to 20%. Managers grab another 10 to 20%. Then the government comes calling, taking a massive 40 to 50% in taxes. On top of everything else, yearly medical bills, often for injuries suffered in the sport itself, can range from $10,000 to $50,000. Let me share some real-world examples that hit you right in the gut. Former UFC fighter Miles Jury once walked away with just $500 profit from a $20,000 fight check after all his expenses got deducted. Think about that, risking his body in combat for $20,000 and netting $500. Even more shocking, Charles Johnson, a UFC flyweight, actually watched his bank account go negative in early 2025 despite having just earned a knockout bonus. His manager literally had to loan him money to take care of his family, especially urgent since his wife was about to deliver their baby. Johnson landed a beautiful knockout, earned a $50,000 bonus, and his checking account still went into the red. This, folks, is the terrifying reality of UFC compensation for most athletes. The UFC has recently dealt with and continues to handle major antitrust lawsuits. The Lee vs. Zuffa case, for example, claimed anti-competitive practices that ruthlessly kept fighter pay artificially low from 2010 to 2017. In September 2024, the UFC finally settled for a significant $35 million. Payments started in September 2025, going out to over 1,100 fighters. Legendary fighter Anderson Silva received the largest payout at $3.3 million, while the average fighter got $200,000. Now, while this settlement definitely acknowledged that something was fundamentally broken about the UFC's pay system, it's important to understand that it hasn't actually transformed their core business approach. Justin Gaethje, the fighter at the heart of this story, isn't just some random athlete complaining about money. He represents the exact type the UFC claims to reward most. He fights with a thrilling, all-action style that puts entertainment value above personal safety. He takes enormous, often frightening risks. He absorbs crushing, debilitating damage. His battle against Max Holloway at UFC 300, as we mentioned, was instantly recognized as one of the greatest of all time for its pure violence and spectacle. Gaethje himself has openly admitted that his fighting approach is exactly why he gets paid what he does. He explained, "This is my job, I do this for the money." Then he added, with striking candor, "If I was to take a heavy wrestling approach, they would never be paying me what they're paying me now." This powerful admission perfectly reveals the UFC's twisted incentive system. Fight smart, protect your long-term health, and you'll earn less money. Fight recklessly, absorb brain trauma, entertain the screaming crowd, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make enough to support your family. And let's discuss the completely arbitrary nature of these bonuses. At UFC 300, Dana White personally gave Gaethje a $300,000 bonus after that incredible Holloway fight. But here's the behind-the-scenes story. Gaethje's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, had actually argued that Gaethje deserved a full $500,000. According to insider reports, Abdelaziz literally grabbed a bag containing cash directly from UFC executive Hunter Campbell during those heated discussions, forcing the UFC to actually hunt him down for 10 days before they finally agreed on that $300,000 figure. This story perfectly demonstrates two critical realities, both the completely random nature of UFC bonuses, which often seem to be made up on the spot, and the complete lack of leverage that fighters have in these negotiations. The core problem is that the UFC operates without any fighters union. Back in 2016, the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association attempted to get started, but unfortunately it never really took off. The brutal truth is that rising fighters simply couldn't find the courage to challenge such a powerful organization. The immediate threat of getting cut from the UFC roster and losing their entire career was simply too much for most to risk. The UFC's near-total control over the sport creates this toxic intimidation effect. Complain about pay, and you might find yourself suddenly released. Try to organize, and you might never compete again in the premier promotion. Dana White himself has been crystal clear about his absolute opposition to unionization. "It's never gonna happen while I'm here," White famously declared. And as long as Dana White stays in control of the UFC, it appears fighters will remain without union representation. They will not collectively negotiate. They will not secure the same basic revenue sharing that athletes in every other major professional sport take for granted. The difference between executive wealth and fighter compensation makes this whole situation painfully clear and impossible to ignore. Dana White's estimated net worth, for instance, tops a staggering $500 million. He owns multiple luxury homes. He travels the globe in private aircraft. Meanwhile, just to hammer this point home, Charles Johnson's bank account went negative despite earning a knockout bonus. He had to borrow money from his manager just to support his family while his wife was literally about to give birth. Ariel Helwani, a prominent MMA journalist, broke this shocking story in early 2025, posting on social media, "Charles Johnson's bank account went into the red this week. His manager lent him some money. Johnson has a baby arriving any day now. Got this big KO, got a bonus too." This post, as you can imagine, created absolute fury across the combat sports world. How people demanded to know, could a UFC fighter who just earned a knockout bonus in a multi-billion-dollar company possibly see his bank account go negative? The answer, tragically simple, lies in that fundamentally broken compensation structure. After paying for coaches' fees, managers' percentages, the crushing expenses of training camp, taxes that consume a huge portion, ongoing medical costs, and travel, fighters end up keeping far less than their seemingly impressive gross earnings. Look at other legends. Demetrius Johnson, one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters in history, actually worked construction jobs during his early UFC days. He fought for the bantamweight title in 2011 for a pathetic $14,000 to show and $14,000 to win. Felicia Herrig, another veteran fighter, said in legal documents something truly heartbreaking. "Fighting for the UFC was the achievement of what I thought was my dream. But the reality is, after a lengthy career, I left with a worn-down body, severe depression, and nothing to show for my years competing at the top of the sport." Justin Gaethje, by comparison, has been fortunate. He's earned decent money, he's made wise real estate moves. But even he recognizes that the entire system is fundamentally broken. Even he admits that 14 bonuses and 14 fights should absolutely add up to more than $950,000. Even he, the poster boy of the new era, admits that the biggest media rights deal in combat sports history hasn't added one single extra dollar to his paycheck. The UFC 34 press conference should have been a moment of pure celebration. It was supposed to announce the first event of a new golden age, supported by a historic $7.7 billion deal and promising better accessibility for fans worldwide. Instead, Justin Gaethje's brutally honest remarks threw a dark, undeniable cloud over the entire event. They exposed the fundamental, deeply rooted unfairness of the UFC's compensation system. They revealed that executive promises about increased fighter earnings were at best wildly premature and at worst completely dishonest. Dana White famously stated that raising fighter pay to 50% of revenue will absolutely never happen while he's running things. He's often compared the situation to boxing, a sport which he claims was ruined by giving fighters too much money. But here's the crucial difference. The UFC isn't in any danger of being ruined by money. Actually, the complete opposite is true. The UFC is absolutely crushing it financially. TKO Group Holdings, its parent company, is currently valued at an astounding $21 billion. The company just locked down a $7.7 billion media rights agreement, and its revenue climbs dramatically year after year. The only people not crushing it, not getting a fair share of this incredible success, are the very fighters who make it all happen. The athletes who put their bodies and brains on the line every single time they step into that cage. For any real, meaningful change to actually occur, fighters would need to do something incredibly difficult. They would need to organize. They would need to courageously form a union despite the UFC's fierce, well-documented resistance. They would need to collectively fight for their true value despite the terrifying risk of punishment and permanently blacklisted. The Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association attempted this and ultimately collapsed back in 2016. Perhaps Justin Gaethje's incredibly brave statements at UFC 34 Media Day will somehow reignite that essential discussion, or maybe, sadly, nothing will actually change. Maybe the UFC will keep generating billions and billions while compensating its brave fighters less than 20%. Maybe executives will continue building even more wealth, living in complete luxury, while the athletes, the heart and soul of the sport, continue struggling just to pay their basic expenses between fights. This Saturday night, Justin Gaethje enters the octagon at UFC 34. He'll battle Paddy Pimblett for an interim lightweight championship. He will absolutely deliver another electrifying, heart-stopping performance because that's simply what the highlight always does. He'll risk permanent brain damage and life-altering injury because that's exactly what the current UFC system rewards and encourages. And when the dust settles, whether he wins or loses, he will take home the exact same paycheck he would have received if this massive $7.7 billion Paramount deal had never existed. Not $1 more. That, everyone, is the harsh, unfiltered truth about fighter compensation in the UFC. That's what a $7.7 billion media rights deal actually means for the dedicated, brave athletes who make it all possible. Absolutely nothing additional. And as Dana White has made perfectly clear, it's a reality that, as long as he remains in charge, will simply never change.